Okay, so now we're going to turn to a larger issue within this topic, which is how we actually develop energy. In this fight against climate change, many countries are trying to curb carbon emissions and come up with alternatives to fossil fuels. And one technology is nuclear fusion, which, as the name implies, fuses nuclear atoms instead of splitting them. It releases enormous amounts of energy and produces temperatures hotter than the sun. For decades, scientists have tried to get safe, unlimited, cheap, and carbon-free energy from nuclear fusion. And now, with the topic of climate change hotter than ever, yes, that was a pun, private projects have multiplied and investment money is pouring in. Marketplace's Stephen Beard paid a visit to one fusion project in southeast England.
I was rather hoping I'd have to don a hazmat suit with Perspex visor to get into this facility, but Kevin Buick, the company's health and safety officer, put me right.
We are a fusion site, so it's exciting stuff that we talk about here, but actually we have very standard hazards.
And so I wore the standard issue for an industrial facility: hard hat, steel toe-cap boots and high-vis jacket. But there's nothing standard about the ambition powering this project.
This is the final frontier, the endgame solution for all time for humankind.
Tokamak Energy's CEO, Chris Kelsall.
We're producing a reliable, safe, clean source of decarbonised energy. It's going to be such an exciting journey that, in fact, has no limits.
The journey sounds dangerous, though. The technology at work here is pretty fearsome. Inside a tokamak, a large steel chamber containing powerful magnets, hydrogen atoms are forced to fuse at incredibly high temperatures.
Our next milestone is 100 million degrees centigrade.
That's 212 million degrees Fahrenheit. Graham Dunbar, project manager of this reactor, the ST40, insists that it's perfectly safe.
Nevertheless, those sorts of temperatures sound pretty scary.
They are contained within the magnetic field, so the outside of ST40 does not get hot. You can put your hand on the outside of ST40.
Unlike with nuclear fission, the radiation emitted by fusion dissipates in about 20 minutes, so no problem with nuclear waste. And there's no potentially uncontrollable chain reaction.
So no possibility of meltdown?
There isn't, no. It's inherently safe.
And potentially cheap, since the fuel, hydrogen, is the 10th most abundant element on Earth, and the fusion process releases 4 times as much energy as fission. Tokamak's boss, Chris Kelsall, hopes to be selling commercial devices within a couple of decades.
We're seeking to develop fusion power plants for global deployment in the late 2030s and early 2040s.
But fusion research projects are underway around the world and have been for half a century. So far, they've all produced less energy than it took to cause the fusion in the first place. Steve Thomas, a retired professor from Greenwich University, is a fusion skeptic.
It's always been just over the horizon, and 50 years on, that's where it still seems to be.
The mantra has always been the same, he says. In another 10 years or so, we'll have a commercial device.
Maybe that will be the case this time around, but I'm sceptical after so many broken promises over the past 50 or so years.
Back at Tokamak Energy, they're undeterred. Just follow the money, says Chris Kelsall. Private investors have poured more than $160 million into his company and more than $1 billion into rival American projects.
Investors are realising that fusion needs to be looked at, it needs to be investigated, and if they don't have a seat at the table, there's a very real risk that they're going to miss out on the next Google.
An international race is underway to make fusion pay, and this company believes it has every chance of winning it. In Didcot, Oxfordshire, I'm Stephen Beard for Marketplace.
This final note on the way out. If you take a look at Google search trends, you can see that people Googling COVID test near me has increased 4 times over the last month. And people asking, where can I buy an at-home COVID test, has increased almost 3,000%. And then lastly, people asking, where can I play Wordle, increased more than 4,000% in the last week. I can confirm that I have Googled all three of those things. Actually, just Googled the Wordle question last night, and then proceeded to spend an hour playing different iterations of the game. And I am definitely going to play it after this show.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay on the mic? All right. I'd like to call to order the January 10th, 2022 regular board meeting of the State College Area School District Board of Directors. I'd like to announce the board held an executive session prior to this meeting regarding personnel, student discipline, and negotiations. And with that, I would like you all to rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone who is here with us this evening, as well as those of you who are viewing remotely or using the hybrid model to be able to zoom in here. Board members with an agenda before you, are there any changes to the agenda as presented? Then Dr. O'Donnell will now go over some of the housekeeping for our hybrid format here.
You bet. Thank you, Amber. For our audience this evening, 30 minutes will be provided at the beginning of the meeting for public comment for items related to board business that are not on the action items portion of the agenda. If additional time is necessary, the board may consider reopening public comment after board business is completed or during our next meeting. Each individual will be limited to comments of up to 3 minutes as time permits for items related to board business that are not on the action item portion of the agenda. For action items, public comment will be held just prior to voting on that item as required by school code. The approach also allows for comments to be informed by the presentation and board's discussion of the respective item. During the meeting, the IT help desk is available for those viewing remotely. If you encounter technical difficulties, you may email our folks at itsupport@scasd.org or give us a call at 814-231-7743. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. O'Donnell. At this time, I'd like to call on our board secretary to do the roll call of board members.
Dr. Anderson.
Here.
Dr. Bader.
Here.
Ms. Brand.
Here.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Here.
Dr. Crevecourt.
Here.
Dr. Duffy.
Here.
Ms. Huff.
Here.
Ms. Zidney.
Here. Okay, thank you for that. At this time, we have one retirement recognition for a retiree who's on our agenda this evening. So I'd like to call on Dr. Bader to do the retiree recognition.
Thanks. Give me 1 second as I switch screens here. Sorry about that. So Joyce Bevilacqua is retiring this June after 37 years with the district. Hired in 1985, Joyce worked as a lunch paraprofessional for her entire career at the former junior high for her first 10 years and then at Park Forest Middle School. Park Forest Principal Karen Weiser praised Joyce's commitment, saying, "Joyce has helped many students at lunchtime since she began at the junior high in 1985. And then at the middle school. She has been a loyal and dedicated lunch para during her tenure. Her assistance to our students over the years is greatly appreciated." The board thanks Joyce for her service and wishes her the best in retirement.
Okay, thank you. And then at this time, I'd like to call on Dr. O'Donnell. He's going to be doing the superintendent update.
Sure, thank you. This will also be the first item under information discussion, so that we did post it there. We're grateful to have 4 members of our health and safety team with us this evening. Dr. Allison Huggins of Mount Nittany Health, Dr. Joy Drass of Geisinger Health, Dr. Matt Ferrari, Director of Penn State Center for Infectious Disease Dynamics, and Jean Knaus, our Director of Student Services. They're with us tonight to help answer some questions from the board. Before that, I'd like to note some of the changes we've recently made as the pandemic has changed. And we've shared these out on Friday to families. Obviously, our lunch has been a priority. So looking at each school and emphasizing and making some changes to physical distancing, as well as increasing air filtration in all of our cafeterias. We've also encouraged students and employees to wear better masks, and we're working right now to finalize the supply of options for students and employees. Although we've distributed many masks to employees, we have supplies arriving this week for options for students. So in relation to student well-being and learning, as long as our students and employees are safe, and being in school is really what we're trying to prioritize. And this is because we can provide a better learning as well as social, emotional, and physical experience for students when they're with our faculty, staff, and peers. So some highlights before I ask a question to the team to have them weigh in, because I really wanted to, help the board to just have a humanistic touch to, why we're prioritizing staying in school at a time where you're seeing increased cases. And so today, overall in our schools, we had 92.6% of our K-12 students present. We're usually around 95 or 96% present, even at this time of year. 106 students were absent today due to COVID. 57 of those students were COVID positive and 59 were close contacts. Out of our employees today, of all employees, 19 total absences were related to COVID, and that includes some individuals who have younger children. Their child care facility were closed. So those are just a snapshot in data. Last week, when we compared last week to the year prior to the pandemic, we were about 5 points off in regard to attendance, usually around 95, 96%. We were right around 89, 90% last week, each of the days. Today, I told you we were almost at 93%. So obviously a little better today. Maybe it was because I gave them a couple extra hours to sleep in. I don't know. In all seriousness, I wanted you to just have those as a point of reference. And we do track attendance, and we'll talk a little bit about some of that in our questions. So the first question that I wanted the members of the team to weigh in on, and I see Matt, Joy, and Allison with us, is why do you support, from your perspective, staying in school? And anything you want to add behind, your thinking that you want to share with the board, I'd appreciate it. So how about we start off, since in order that I see Allison, Joy, and Matt. Sorry, Matt, but how about we start out with Allison there?
Okay, so why I feel like we should stay in school. I feel like the risk to kids' health of being out of school far outweighs the risks of them being in school. I think that SCASI has spent a great deal of time developing mitigation strategies that seem to work. Fortunately, many of our patients in my practice have had mild symptoms recently. Also, this year, vaccines were approved for school-age children and are now widely available. Over the last 18 months, pediatric practices have seen a huge uptick in mental health visits. School provides a stable and social environment for these and all children. Nationwide, there is already evidence of negative impacts on children because of school closures in 2020. And I feel SCASI is taking things very seriously, and I feel comfortable having all 4 of my children doing in-person learning at this time.
Thanks, Allison. How about we'll turn it over to Joy?
I just want to echo and agree with Allison's comments so far. We're nearly 2 years into this now. We're coming up on 2 years since the initial shutdown. And for, a 10-year-old fifth grader, that's 20% of their life and has now affected 3 of their 6 years of, not a complete 3 years of school, but 3 different grade levels of their school experience. And the statistics are really clear that thankfully our kids are pretty protected from severe illness with even COVID positive testing. They're at the lowest risk of severe disease, but the highest risk of effects of, the shutdown mentality and when we take them out of the school environments, that sort of thing. We absolutely have seen some side effects of the shutdown for kids in our practice. Daily, we see kids with anxiety and depression symptoms. And in talking to my partners, and Allison and I have had some conversation about, severe illness in kids. I think total, we were talking about probably somewhere in the range of 3 to 6 between 2 practices of kids that have had to be admitted for COVID from our practices. I don't know the data on how many of those were actually in our district because we do take care of kids from surrounding districts as well. But 1 or 2 true acute COVID illness and 1 or 2 admissions for possible MIS-C workups about a month after their COVID illness. And thankfully all have done very well. So in the school age population, we really are talking about risks of complications much, much lower than some of our other common infections this time of year, like RSV and influenza. And we definitely are seeing very high rates of ADHD evaluations and school problems, kids who have had pretty significant weight increases during this pandemic, and very, very high rates of anxiety and depression. We screen all kids at checkups that are 12 years old and up for symptoms that might make us worry about depression. And, you know, just a very rough estimate in the office is probably at least 30% endorse some symptoms. All of our behavioral health colleagues in town are full. We can't get patients in when they need services. So this has been really, really hard on our kids, and the kids who seem to fare the best are the ones that have been able to stay involved in some sort of goal-directed activity, whether that's a sport, playing an instrument, just some way to stay engaged with their peers and have some goal-directed activities. So the school environment's really, really important for their overall health right now.
Thanks, Joy. And Matt?
Yeah, so I'll echo the excellent points made by Allison and Joy, and then my perspective on this comes as an epidemiologist and considering the effects on the rest of the population, not only the children in the school district. And you know, from that perspective, particularly in the light of the Omicron variant, I have a number of concerns about the potential for the school environment to contribute to transmission and increasing community spread, and the consequences of that, not just for the infection of children, but for other community members and high-risk individuals, and the impact that may have on our health systems and our hospitals. I do think, however, that at the moment we've taken on board and maintained a really strong level of mitigating measures, maintaining masking, distancing wherever possible, I think a really conservative stance towards isolation and quarantine to try and limit the potential spread in the school setting. I think that the evidence that we have over the course of the last 2 years has been so far really quite limited contribution of school-based transmission in driving the community cases. And so, you know, in light of that, I think the benefits that Allison and Joy have highlighted and I'm sure that everybody on the board is well aware of the benefits of kids being in school and learning, I think far outweigh the evidence for risks both to kids and to the rest of the community that we've seen at the moment. You know, though again, I'm always the one that says you know, we're continuing to monitor that, and you know, if we see that trend changes, then I think we have the systems in place and the plans in place to pivot if necessary.
Thanks, Matt. You know, I'm going to turn it over to Amber. She has some questions from the board. One of the things I wanted to share, I know we're talking about cases and students, and I had spent some time talking with some elementary faculty members today, and I think, you know we have some kids that are out right now, as I had mentioned, about on average 4 students per building who were COVID positive that were out today, and I have had some families asking, you know, why we're not shifting to hybrid remote, and we're really trying to support our faculty without fragmenting them to the degree we did last year. And you know, teaching with masks all day isn't the easiest thing to do, but we really want to make sure that we're focused on maximizing the time students have with our faculty and not taking away the ability for faculty to make connections with kids in the classroom, and the hybrid really does that. And teaching to 2 different groups of students clearly was a real challenge for us, and it really took away from the social connections teachers were able to build with kids that are critical to engaging students. So I just wanted to share that in appreciation of our faculty, and that's how we're working. And if parents have students at home and have concerns or questions, to work with their teachers and principals and counselors with any supports they need while their students are out. And as the pediatrician shared, and as you know, the CDC made some changes. You know, students aren't typically out very long at this time if they are impacted by the pandemic. So I just wanted to highlight that. So I'm going to turn it over to Amber now for some questions. And thanks, Allison, Joy, and Matt for joining us tonight, and obviously Jean for keeping us going as a team. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for being here this evening with us. Just on behalf of the board, I want to give you enormous thanks for the 2 years now of work that you've put in, volunteering your time with the school district. So with that, I have a few questions. What we had done is ask board members to provide their questions to us ahead of time so that we could kind of be organized in how we tossed off those questions to the team. So the first question, that has been a consistent, a question from families in the community and that, that board members have been getting, it's just if you could speak to the relative safety of the school environment for children and what factors make it, allow us to make that environment a safe environment for children. And I think you had touched on some of this before in your answers too. But,
well, while masking in school is not always a popular policy, the CDC changes that came out last week, I think showed evidence, one, of how quickly Omicron spreads. So that's one of the reasons that isolation and quarantine is shortened, is because it seems to move through pretty quickly. But two, it also doubled down on the importance of masking and the difference that seems to make as one of the big things that we can do to lower transmission. And I understand all the challenges that they provide, and I know it's not a perfect scenario, but it helps us to keep kids in school and minimize the isolation and quarantine and the identification of close contacts and those sorts of things. And our district has worked really, really hard, and I know the teachers and all the staff in the buildings work hard to keep the kids physically distanced whenever possible, and have stayed really consistent with hand washing. The nurses have worked, an unbelievable amount of hours trying to identify kids with symptoms and send them home and identify the close contacts when cases have come up. The important things are, at this point, when case rates are so high, wearing your mask, trying to stay distanced when you can, good hand washing, and staying home when you're sick. And those are all really high priorities in our health and safety plan at this point.
Okay, thank you. So another question that I had received was in regard to, we're seeing such incredibly high case counts in the community as a whole, and certainly some of the higher case counts we've been seeing in schools. And the question was about the utility potentially of closing for 2 weeks and whether a break like that could have a positive impact or not. So the question being, would that help us, or would we be in the same place 2 weeks from now?
So I can try and take some of that. So first of all, it's impossible to predict the future. We can make some projections, but I think I think at this point it's really hard to know where we would be 2 weeks from now and what a school closure would mean with respect to that. And I think back to Joy's point, we've taken an enormous step to help ensure that the school setting is a comparatively and a relatively safe environment. And I think that I think it's the one of the important things that we need to consider throughout this throughout our consideration of our response to this pandemic is our absolute risks and relative risks. And our students in the school setting are in a setting that is comparatively well controlled, that is masked, that has professional educators that are paying attention to them, looking out for symptoms, that has nurses on staff, and we have a controlled environment where we can keep track of contacts and make necessary adjustments if a kid does turn up sick. We know what classroom they're in, who they've been in contact, et cetera. So from that perspective, there are many aspects of the in-school experience that actually argue for a comparatively safe environment or comparatively safer environment than the uncertainty that we would have if kids were in a fully remote setting. And, I mean, if they were all locked down in their rooms 24 hours a day, yes, that would be enormously safe. But the reality of the world is that if we were remote for 2 weeks, we would have lots of other unknown and uncertain factors, social activities, sport activities, all these kinds of things that comparatively high risk activities that we know are happening in the background anyway. So having kids in a well-controlled, structured environment, where we can, where we can enact measures that we think are keeping them safe, I think is a strong argument at the moment. And again, the evidence at this point has been for quite limited transmission in the school setting. So even from the standpoint of absolute risk, we don't have any evidence at this point that the absolute risks of in-person instruction are high.
Point out that we did kind of just take a 2-week break, and during that 2-week break, our numbers were higher than they are now. So we saw that spike. So that's kind of something we could look at to say, it is going to spread. The kids aren't going to be staying at home. The students aren't going to be staying at home. They're going to be out and about, most likely.
Okay. So another question we had is for the pediatricians in terms of what advice you would give parents when their child tests positive. That is, what suggestions do you have for care at home, and what are the signs to look for as to when you should call a pediatrician?
So there are some concerning symptoms, clearly with any viral illness. If a child has an underlying health condition, I always think it's a good idea to contact your primary care physician just to talk about things further. But if a child develops chest pain, shortness of breath, if their fever lasts more than 4 to 5 days, if you have concerns with dehydration or any concerns at all, reach out to your primary care physician. While recovering from COVID, we're going to want to be pushing fluids, making sure kids are getting plenty of rest, doing some antipyretics, Tylenol if you're having some fever or discomfort. And while it's challenging in a home environment to separate people, our office has seen a lot of in-home transmission. So if you've got teenagers who can be in their room for a few days, spend the 5 to 7 days in their rooms, young children, that's a lot harder with. But masking, if there's someone positive in your house, is recommended. Like I said, if there's any concerns at all, reach out to your primary care physician. I don't know if Joy has anything to add to that.
I agree.
Thank you. Okay. We've heard from some families with children younger than 5 who are unable to get the vaccine at this time, and the concern about whether it's safe for them to send their school-age children to school while they have unvaccinated young children at home. And we're wondering, what is your feedback in terms of the relative safety of sending those those older children to school when you do have children younger than 5, and how can we keep those kids under 5 safe?
I think that's a great question, because the 4 and under population is the one section now that hasn't had the opportunity to get vaccine. The hope is if you have a school-age child that has had vaccine, their risk of getting significant illness is lower. Even if they test positive for COVID, their risk of spreading their overall viral load should be lower, which should be helpful in terms of less risk of in-home transmission. It's certainly not 0, but hopefully it's much, much lower. And then I again step back and think we need to put it in a comparison to our routine cold and flu season viruses, and even kids under 4, kids a year in age of and under have been identified as a group that has a slightly higher risk of complications because they have a chance of getting sicker from routine illnesses anyway. But in general, all of those populations, 0 to 4, still tend to fare much, much better with COVID than they do an illness like RSV or influenza. The risk of hospitalization from those viruses, which have been around every single winter, is still much, much lower. So I'm still pretty comfortable with a school age kid, even with a younger child at home, because again, in our offices. Of the kids that I know that have been admitted from our practice, none of them are in that young age group.
Okay. Thank you. And one of the questions we had from a board member was from observing the data that we've had on infections among employees. And lately we've been seeing that vaccinated employees seem to be catching COVID at similar rates, or, and in some weeks higher rates even than unvaccinated employees. And if you could give us some, any feedback on why we might still be, I guess why we might be seeing that kind of data, and what does that tell us in terms of the safety to vaccinated employees of in case they are to be exposed to the virus?
So I'll comment that. So what we're increasingly seeing is that the predominance of infections that we're seeing, far greater than 50%, probably up around 75% of infections right now are attributable to the Omicron variant. Most of the evidence at this point suggests that the what we previously called fully vaccinated. So this is somebody who has a 2-dose series of Pfizer or Moderna, or a single dose with Johnson & Johnson, but not a booster, has really quite minimal protection against infection with Omicron. It's a significantly enough different virus that it appears to, nearly completely evade prior immunity due to vaccination with what we considered the fully vaccinated status before. And so from that standpoint, I would expect to see infection rates, so test positive, not illness, but test positive rates that are consistent amongst vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals. And in fact, one of the things that we've oftentimes seen in other settings are that individuals who are vaccinated let their guard down a little bit because they think they're vaccinated and they have this protection. And so therefore they might be more likely to take on risky activities, engage in group activities, things like that might increase their exposure. And so that could also lead to a higher rate of infection among vaccinated individuals, not because of any difference in vaccine efficacy, but because of the behavior and the exposure. I do want to emphasize, however, that despite the fact that we're seeing low protection against infection, we're seeing really quite high protection against severe disease amongst fully vaccinated individuals. And individuals that have been boosted still have quite significant protection against infection at all, and certainly against severe disease and hospitalization. So again, this Omicron variant, it's unfortunate, and even amongst the protection that you get even boosted is probably closer to 75% rather than the 90% that we were talking about with the Alpha and the Delta variants. So that is the reality of things, and so vaccinated and boosted folks are going to get infected with Omicron. It's just that they're much less likely to have severe disease. The progression of their disease is going to be much faster, and they're much less likely to end up in the hospital.
That's helpful. So part of the message then is that we need to be making sure people are getting their boosters then in this time. And it seems like we've had really good uptake in our community.
The evidence to go along with that is that the protection that the booster conveys in protection in days. So you actually get that, unlike that primary series where we were talking about 2 weeks to be fully vaccinated, the booster is providing protection in days, and I think that's really important. So it's not too late to get protected, to get protected against this Omicron wave from the booster. In fact, it's really it's really I think a call to arms to get everybody protected.
Thank you. Okay, and a final question was about our masking practices and whether, in light of the increased spread of the Omicron variant, if you would see any utility in people wearing masks outdoors when they're in crowded situations or close to others, even though we don't require it, whether that's a practice that would be, whether there would be an improved safety if people did choose to do so.
I guess generally speaking, I mean, a mask is generally speaking better than no mask. So it's absolutely more protective to have a mask on, indoors, outdoors, regardless. That said, outdoor activities have generally speaking been safe, and they're safe. They're comparatively well ventilated, and I think that the one of the suggestions is that it makes it easier for everybody to comply with masking indoors if they have opportunities to step outside, do some regular stuff, take their mask off, let their guard down a little bit, and it helps to maintain vigilance in the higher risk settings, in the classroom and indoors. And so I think that's been our priority has been to maintain vigilance and compliance in those high risk settings.
And then this was not in the document, but I had one more question I hadn't thought of while we were talking. There's been a lot of discussion about the new CDC guidelines in regard to the 5 days of isolation and being able to come out on day 6, which really we're talking about the day you test is day 0, and then 5 days of isolation. And then it's really if symptoms are improving and resolving that people can come out on the 6th day. Do you have any feedback in regard to those guidelines and the relative safety of days 6 through 10 and what people should be looking for at that time to determine whether their symptoms are resolved to a point where it's reasonable to end their isolation period? Because it seems like this has been something that's been kind of been a lot of confusion in regard to the evidence behind the CDC recommendation and what does that mean to have symptoms resolving. So.
It is admittedly a little bit murky. It's a hard concept to really lay out black and white rules for. But the overall principle behind the new guidelines is you are by far and away most infective early on in your illness. When you test viral loads, your viral load, the number of virus particles is highest probably for about 24 hours before you start showing symptoms through the first 4 to 8 hours of symptoms, and then slowly dwindles over the rest of the illness. So the most bang for your buck is, and let me just back up and just so that we're all on the same page as far as verbiage. Isolation is what you do if you personally have had a positive COVID test. Quarantine is what all those around you who may have been exposed to a person who is isolated. So the numbers for days have equaled out a little bit recently, but there is just a little bit difference when we talk about the two. So if you've had a positive test after day 5, if symptoms are improving, so that means no fever for at least 24 hours. And then we encourage people really to have a pretty good improvement in symptoms such as runny nose and sneezing and coughing, because that's when you're most likely to, spread secretions and virus particles. They don't have to be completely resolved because some people will cough for 2 weeks after, the old 10-day isolation period was over, but your symptoms need to be significantly improved. And then you're encouraged to wear a mask at all times for the additional 5 days, so that if you are still spreading any virus particles, that's minimized by mask wearing. So those, to come out of isolation, you should be starting to feel better, because those people should have had symptoms, and really very minimal symptoms. If you had fever for 5 full days with COVID and felt really miserable, and we've seen that happen sometimes, those people probably aren't ready to come out, but they also don't feel like they're ready to come out of isolation after that 6th day. For quarantine, that's for people who are exposed. You need to stay at home, stay away from others, quarantine in your house for 5 full days, and then still maintain significant vigilance through days 6 through 10, and any onset of new symptoms, whether it be minimal sniffles or cough, you want to try to catch the earliest signs of possible infection. And so stay home, remove yourself from social settings, and schedule to get a test, ideally.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I really appreciate all of your your answers on these. I think our next questions are for the administrative team. Dr. O'Donnell, do you want to do those questions?
Sure. There's a question regarding, if there's a point where a classroom, a grade level, or buildings has students missing due to isolation and quarantine, such that it might actually be better to go into temporary remote instruction. So we have had that instance with a grade level in a school, and we did go into a short-term full remote situation. And our process is to quickly circle up with our safety team. We typically involve the nurses who have been involved with the parents in the contact tracing. And then we look for input from Allison, Joy, and Matt. And so Jean has everybody's cell phone numbers, and we circle up on a Google Meet immediately. And over break, this happened 3 times. And we had 3 different athletic programs that we shut down because of what we saw. And so I just, we do look to the team, and we have attendance secretaries in every building monitoring absences, and we code absences related to the pandemic so that the parent reporting feature is really appreciated. Right now, we average about 4, today we had 4 students per school on average out. So that's not how it broke down, but we have students from around the district who are out right now because of the pandemic, and we're monitoring them and coding them in the system so that we at the district level as well as the building level can keep an eye on that. And the building nurses are in the mix, and we have the nurses focused on serving the students and employees in the building and answering questions from parents, as well as sending students who are symptomatic home. As was shared here, how quickly the incubation period is here, we want to make sure that we're doing our best to make sure students are staying home who might be infectious. So hopefully that gives a little bit of, for the students who are out, we'd love to run direct remote instruction. I think the challenge is we're striving to cover all of our classrooms in person, so we'd be pulling staffing away from that, or looking to shift on a dime to hybrid, and that's something that we've strived to commit to not fragment the faculty even more right now. So thanks. Hopefully that's helpful.
Okay. So we had some questions in regard to test to stay programs. I know the state has communicated about the possibility of those. And to be clear, like a test to stay is an idea of students who would otherwise be required to quarantine because of an exposure to be able to take a test, to do rapid tests on a daily basis, to be able to continue coming to school. So I know at this time you're not recommending a test to stay program. And if you could just, maybe Jean, if you could kind of go over why that recommendation is at this time.
Sure. So the test to stay looks at several things. So the community transmission, the vaccination rates, the mitigation strategies within the district. It requires anyone that's considered a close contact to be tested on day 2, and then between days 5 and 7. So it's highly uses our resources, requires, it's labor intensive. If we take for consideration, we have our close contacts last couple weeks was like 600, that would be over 1,200 tests. So to just manage the ins and outs of that, who's in, who's out, who's testing, who's not testing, what the timeline is in that date, is quite cumbersome. The fact that we do have a high vaccination rate, that we have a layered mitigation strategy following CDC protocols, and that we do have access to testing within our community, either through CVIM, through our local pediatricians, our local providers, AMI, and then we also have some district access to that. We feel that we have this in a good place right now. And that our nurses can contact on what Bob just said, managing the health in the schools, sending students home who are sick, helping others process the information. So for now, we feel like we're in a good space, but we are keeping tabs on that. And that might be something we look at down the road, but right now, we don't feel like it's a good move to make.
With students who are vaccinated, if they are fully vaccinated, they're not being required to quarantine unless they have developed symptoms, right? So in that sense, it would only be unvaccinated students that would be allowed to stay, that it would make that difference in terms of staying in school.
Correct.
But fortunately, we do now have vaccines available for all school-age children. Okay, so anyways, I think that's all the questions, board members. Was there anything that I missed in terms of questions that you had? Okay. All right, well, thank you so much to our health and safety team members. I know this has been a long haul, and especially thank you for having helped out so much over winter break when all of us were on break. We know that you spent a lot of time, conferencing over how to move forward and reopen schools as safely as possible in the circumstances that we found ourselves in, coming out of break with this new variant. So, yeah, if there's anything else you'd want to communicate to us, and otherwise we'll, let you go this evening. But we just really appreciate the work that you've been doing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Have a good night.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Okay. Dr. O'Donnell, I guess I'll turn it back over to you then.
Well, unless there are any other board member questions, that's all I have. I do want to say that appreciate Miriam Ruback for serving. Today's her last meeting of her time with us. And so we'll see you soon, hopefully.
Definitely.
When we get over for the spring term for a work session or other meetings, that we'll connect with you as well. So thanks.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been really amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
All right, thank you. The next item is the legislative update. Jackie and Carlene, do you have anything to report on legislative?
Well, I'll go first because I don't. So because we've been cut off from the national, so I'm going to have to look at elsewhere to get that information, because it was nice when they would just send me all of the updates. So I have to look at different avenues. So if anybody has ideas they would just share with me, that would be great.
That's a good question. Yeah. I know some of the publications like Education Week.
I do. I've been looking at that too.
But we should brainstorm on that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I just have a few updates. So I wanted to, since it's our first meeting of 2022, I wanted to just briefly go over PSBA's legislative platform for the year. So there are 4 points. Number 1, the state must enact meaningful charter school reforms. 2, the state must provide a significant and continued financial investment for school districts that is distributed fairly and equitably. 3, the state must address Pennsylvania's pension funding crisis. And 4, the state must prioritize the safety and mental health needs of students by providing schools with a permanent funding stream and assistance. So that's our legislative platform. That is their legislative platform for 2022.
Great. Thank you.
The only other update I have is that the House Bill 1332, which I've mentioned the last 2 meetings, which mandated school districts posting of curriculum, was vetoed by Governor Wolf, and he stated that state regulations adopted by the State Board of Ed already require that public schools provide parents and guardians with course curriculum and instructional materials upon request. In addition, textbooks are adopted by school boards in meetings open to the public. So that bill has been vetoed. Governor Wolf will be making his budget address on February 8th. So just wanted to get that on your calendars, because I know you are all really excited about that. And finally, the fair funding trial continues. It should last about another 4 weeks. And yeah, I'll have more updates on that next time. But.
Great, thank you. Okay, Council of Governments report. Gretchen and Peter, do you have anything to report from the COG?
I'll start, Peter, and then hand it over to you. So today there was a Climate Action and Sustainability Committee meeting, and that was just sort of an introductory to what they're going to be working on this coming year. One thing that I wanted to point out is a greenhouse gas inventory, which I know we've talked about sort of wanting to do that in the school district, and they're actually starting it this year in the COG through that committee. So maybe we can work with Pam Adams and see if we can do that together. And then the second item is tomorrow there's a public safety committee meeting, and I have found those to be helpful pertaining to the school district, just in terms of COVID especially, to see what COG is doing, to see what the municipalities are doing. to share with them what the school district is doing, and just having open communication about what they're going through and what they're learning has been pretty helpful this past couple years. Now, I was going to say this past year, but this past couple years. And then Peter will give an update on the SPPA.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gretchen. The solar power purchase agreement, the project management team will be meeting on Wednesday morning, just so that the folks know. That is the group that has been created by the larger solar power purchase agreement working group to handle more of the specific incoming contractual work. So we work directly with Green Sky, who is the consultant. The point of contact for that is Randy Brown, who's our finance director. We have received an update from Greg Shively and Green Sky on kind of some about market conditions, what it looks like, a possible solar project. I don't want to say that as like an asset that the district will own, but what that could look like, what some of the pricing looks like, and what the sort of different potential contractual arrangements are. The project management team will be looking at those together this coming week, but that's really as far as the update should go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, at this time, we have time for public comment. As Dr. O'Donnell had indicated earlier, each individual is limited to comments of up to 3 minutes as time permits for items that are related to board business that are not on the action items portion of the agenda. For action items, public comment will be held just prior to voting on that item, as is required by school code. At this time, if there's anyone here in attendance who would like to make a public comment, you're welcome to come up to the lectern. And if there's anyone who is attending over Zoom who would like to make a public comment, you're welcome to raise your hand using the raise hand function on Zoom, and I'll go ahead and call on you. Okay, Jennifer I'm sorry, I see your hand raised. If you'd like to unmute yourself, then you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jennifer Money, and I live in Ferguson Township. I'm here tonight to address the newly adopted masking requirements for athletics, mainly the requirement that all athletes practicing indoors must be masked, including during high-intensity training. This is not only unsafe, but potentially illegal for the school to mandate such a policy. I'm not here to ask you to ban masks. I'm here to simply remove the requirement and allow the student and their family to assess their own individual risk and choose to wear a mask or not. As you're likely aware, the Erie County Public School System is facing legal action regarding the continuation of their masking policy after the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that the health secretary did not have the legal authority to mandate masks in the public school system. Let me read part of the letter written by Mr. Chadwick Schnee, the lawyer challenging the mask mandate policy. He stated the Pennsylvania Supreme Court recently agreed that the acting health secretary lacked the legal authority under the Disease Prevention and Control Law of 1955 and the Administrative Code of 1929 to require masks in school. Public schools additionally do not have any legal authority to require masking. As creatures of statute, school districts only have the powers and legal authority granted to them by the General Assembly in 22 PA Code 12.3. And the General Assembly has not vested school districts with any legal authority to require students to wear face masks. While some school districts have argued that they have some authority under 25 PS 5-510 to, quote, adopt and enforce such reasonable rules as it may deem necessary in property, this, quote, rulemaking power is not unlimited. A school board must operate within statutory and constitutional restraints. Schools cannot, quote, make rules that are outside their grant of authority from the General Assembly. He concludes his letter with this: considering that Pennsylvania's highest court found the Secretary of Health did not have the power to require masks in schools under the Disease Prevention and Control Law, it is unlikely that schools under general powers to implement rules and regulations possess more power regarding disease prevention than the Secretary of Health. With that in mind, I encourage you to revisit the mandatory mask policy within athletics in the health and safety plan, then make the appropriate policy changes to comply with legal authority granted you by the General Assembly. This legal authority does not include a mask mandate. Please reconsider your health and safety plan and encourage and recommend rather than require masks, especially for athletics. Each student and their family should assess their own individual risk level and choose whether to wear a mask or not. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I do think it's worth noting that even actually the plaintiffs in the case, Senator Corman, who was one of the lead plaintiffs, his stated position was that school boards should have the authority to require masks or not require them. So I think, you know, even the plaintiff who took the case to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court maintained that he believed school districts had that authority. So, Dr. Etter, is there anything else that you think we're missing here?
The letter that was quoted, which I have not seen, I assume the reading was accurate, did include a lot of the touchstones that I would point to if I were asked to comment on this, including the general rulemaking authority that we have a district have. I would say that the reference, or what I would consider the mischaracterization of what the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said, it was that they did not have the rulemaking authority to make the rule in the manner that they did, not that they lacked the rulemaking authority, period.
Thank you. That's helpful.
And just to clarify for the board, and we work with the team closely on this, and both Joy and Allison are very dialed in on youth athletics as well as their background over time with sports plays into this. But I do think when students are competing, they're not required to mask. It's when they're training. However, in wrestling, obviously, that we are they're cohorting, so to speak, with their weight classes. In swimming, we're not masking during swimming, but in other sports we are. If they can be physically distanced, then that's it gives the coaches some flexibility. But in many instances, they're masking. And you'll see even in high school varsity competitions. I went to a varsity game last week, and there were students who opted to compete in masks, and they were competing at a pretty good level. We're one of the larger school levels in the sport, and the team we played, which is a large school district, just today announced they shut down their athletic department for a whole week because they're struggling with transmissions. So the main reason we're doing that in practice is so that we can keep teams up and running. And it's not for their whole season. We said at this time, and we're going to monitor it, and we'll take it back to the team as we go. But we did up the precautions because of what we saw over break in closing down 3 programs for a temporary time period. So hope that helps.
I appreciate that, to keep these opportunities available to students. Is there anyone else who would like to make a public comment? You can use the raised hand function on Zoom. Okay, seeing none, then we will move on to routine approvals. And I'd like a motion to accept or to approve the routine approval listing as presented on the agenda.
Brant, so moved.
Sydney, second. Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Questions on routine approvals? Okay, all right, seeing none, then is there any public comment on the routine approvals? Okay, then we will have a roll call vote.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Ms. Huff?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Anderson?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Dr. Buck?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Crevecoeur?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That item has passed. Item A, under action items. I'm sorry. Yes.
Just one thing. My memory was activated by seeing the request for the foreign exchange student.
Yes.
If we can somehow put back on our collective agenda, we had talked about reviewing the district's policy on number of students, because there was a year that we had to actually turn students away, and we discussed at the time whether we wanted to relook at that. So I just wanted to bring that back to the board's attention.
Okay.
For looking at, I think we were talking about looking at in policy, because I think it's an actual policy.
Oh, is it in a board policy?
I
believe so, and I think
thought
what we
so.
should do is
Okay.
bring Jean, just for the history and,
Yeah.
you know, what.
Yeah,
we
but
run
I
that
just,
through
I
her
remembered it was a couple of years ago, obviously, we haven't
do
had a lot.
remember, yep.
So that's why I
Yep.
wanted to mention it again.
I think we came to you and requested to go over by one that particular year.
Right.
Um,
Right.
So, and this is a unique transition of a student mid-year, but,
Yeah, I just was thinking about it when this came up.
Point of order. Sorry. If I would request that if there's going to be a discussion item about something that we're doing, that it happen following the motion and the second. If this is in the part of the routine approvals, right, instead of after the fact of the routine approvals. I don't mean to necessarily single you out, Ms. Zidney, but if we're going to do it, if we can do that in an orderly fashion so that we're not jumping back into previous items on the agenda, I would just really appreciate that. Thank you.
or maybe on future agenda items, right? Okay. Thanks, Laura.
Okay, so item A under action items is a motion to approve an extension to the Act 93 administrative agreement dated 2017 to 2022 as presented in attachment 6A.
Brandt, so moved.
Duffy, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this item? Okay, any public comment? Okay. And I'd just like to thank the team that worked on this agreement and in terms of this extension, for your work on this as well. Okay, then at this time, we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Huff.
Yes.
Ms. Sidney.
Yes.
Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brand.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Okay, so that item has passed. Item B is a motion to approve the memorandum of agreement with Shavers Creek Environmental Center for Board Professional Development Services for January 31st, 2021. This is shown in attachment 6B.
Brandt, so moved.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this item? Okay, is there any public comment? Okay, we will have a roll call vote then.
Ms. Sidney.
Yes.
Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brand.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Ms. Huff.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item C is a motion to approve an amendment with Ignite for Title I services for Nittany Christian and the Friends Schools, as shown in attachment 6C.
Brandt, so moved.
Duffy, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this item? Any public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brand.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Ms. Huff.
Yes.
Ms. Sidney.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item D is a motion to approve purchase of FMX software for the physical plant computerized maintenance management system, as shown in attachment 6D.
Brandt, so moved.
Duffy, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion?
I just want to acknowledge the memo in terms of the way in which it describes the processes that will be supervised, if you will, by this system. It just seems to have, it just builds in more controls over the practices we're involved with, the procedures we're following, the materials we're purchasing, the lifespan of those materials, the kinds of things we talk about, kind of qualitatively, but they're going to give quantitative value to those and a time value to those, which I think will help a lot. Let's appreciate the detail in the memo. It's really helpful.
Thanks, Mike.
Absolutely.
Peter?
Yeah, I concur with what Mr. Duffy said, so thank you very much for including that. And this certainly brought to mind something that Ms. Brandt brought up earlier about the COG Climate Action Sustainability Committee, that greenhouse gas inventory and the potential for us really understanding more of the physical operations, keeping on track of it. It's my understanding that you do continuous commissioning for the district or have some role in the continuous commissioning of our physical plant. Is that correct?
Every first and third Monday.
Okay, great. Awesome, the first and third Monday are continuous commissioning days. And so just thinking about how it, in going forward, more of the regional greenhouse gas emissions approach, the district might think about how to work not only with Pam Adams, the sustainability coordinator for the COG, there's also the facilities manager for the COG and what that kind of intergovernmental cooperation might look like. And I don't know exactly the answer to that question. I think that it probably requires more discussion, but something worth raising.
Gretchen?
Yeah, I was just gonna ditto what Dan and Peter said, and reading the memo, it does look like this is a great change because there's going to be more data collection than has happened in the past, and so when things like the greenhouse gas inventory get to come to fruition here in the district, it'll be easier to get that data. So just sort of that forward-thinking lens in making these choices about facilities in particular, but really ultimately everything the district purchases, but in terms of sustainability practices was a delight to read about. So I got very excited about it. I think it's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any public comment on this item? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Brand?
Yes.
Dr. Bach?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Crevetor?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Ms. Huff?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Anderson?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item E is a motion to approve the mental health provider contract with Dr. Paul Harris as shown in attachment 6E.
Brant, so moved.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Yes, Peter?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I just wanted to pass along some personal appreciation for the work that Dr. Harris does. I did like a little dive into some of the research studies that he's done
Good.
on the connections between communicating emotions and understanding emotions in children, anxiety, family attachment, and their ability to regulate, and how important that is for our staff in the district to work with someone who really gets to understand that, and how important that is for so many of our kids right now. And I'm just really appreciative of our opportunity to support that kind of work. So, thank everyone who's involved.
Well, Saria's online, and her relationships with him is the reason how we got here. So, Saria, if there's anything you want to weigh in on, thanks for picking up on that.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Peter. And yeah, absolutely. We're really, really excited for the opportunity to be able to consult with Dr. Harris and just excited for the opportunities. We've already had some meetings with him and some of our school members just to basically try our best to get a handle on what's going on in our district this year, because we all know we've seen a increase in mental health concerns as well as behavioral concerns in schools. So thank you so much, Peter, for looking at that. And absolutely, he is a stellar individual to work with.
Thank you. Saria, I did have a couple questions about this, primarily just to get like a little bit of a better understanding of although I did read through the documents carefully, but just a little better understanding of what he's providing. Particularly, I was wondering, like, is this the kind of services that will help our staff when they're going to write a 504 plan or an IEP plan for a student with some needs in these areas to have a better sense of what interventions or strategies might be helpful for those students? Or is it broader than that?
It is broader than that. So, I mean, I could say yes, and because what he has been doing is meeting with us as a team, for example, at one of the schools with the principal, the school counselor. It's kind of like we have our MTSS meetings that we do, but this is a meeting that we have been doing because we've been seeing such a significant rise overall. What we are trying to figure out is what can we be doing at tier 1 that can help to significantly decrease the increase of students that we have been seeing moving to tier 2 and tier 3. And additional into his work on anxiety and aggression, a lot of his work also focuses on working with students of color as well. And so he has that additional piece of that we have been looking for regarding our significant disproportionality work and ensuring that we are being proactive in those services. So he's helping us in that case too. So will some information regarding 504 IEP, different things like that end up being discussed? Yes, but right now what we're trying to do is look broader. So he is trying to help us across the school system, not necessarily as much on the individual level.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Saria. Is there any public comment on this? All right, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Dr. Buck?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Crevecourt?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Ms. Huff?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Anderson?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Thank you so much. Item F is a motion to approve the 2022-2023 Budget Accelerated Opt-out Resolution as shown in attachment 6F.
Brandt, so moved.
Sydney, second.
Okay, that has been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this item? Okay, is there any public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Dr. Buck?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Crevecourt?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Ms. Huff?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Anderson?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item G is a motion to approve permission to bid the 2022-2023 deferred maintenance projects as shown in attachment 6G.
Brandt, so moved.
Buck, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Questions or discussion on these items? Okay. Sorry, yes, Laurel?
I'm just trying to remember whether this was discussed previously in a board meeting or whether it was at a committee meeting. Just in case, yeah, in case, I know we talked about it.
December
Okay.
20th?
Just in case someone was looking back into where it came from, that's the only reason I was double checking. I know we've talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the thoroughness of these documents. It's been, it was-
Yeah. It really helps.
Yeah. Okay.
If you stick to those amounts, it'll be a magic.
Actually,
Yes, Carly?
yeah, when I was reviewing that, I just had one question. I don't know if it was brought up before. When you had the general TBD with the amount, what does that mean? District, there was 2 of them.
So this list encompasses both the rest of fiscal year '22 and all of fiscal year '23, and it's basically a contingency. In case something comes up, arises that we had not planned for.
I figured that much, but one of them was like specific, the amount. So this is why I was thinking was something else. Yeah, 70,800 and.
It was a prorated amount from the accounting department.
Okay.
For the remainder of fiscal year. Has given Mike a budget.
I
And so
see.
it was the residual left over.
I see, okay. Thank you.
I like to control things.
I had just a couple quick questions, I think. One was on the high school amphitheater landscaping. And is that you're going to be grading that slope a little bit differently to make it easier to use the lawnmower on? I wasn't.
We're really the hardscape, but we don't have to use a lawnmower on.
Okay.
It is currently a very steep slope, which presents an extreme safety hazard for our custodial staff.
I could see that pushing a lawnmower on a steep hill is not a good idea.
So we'll hardscape it so there'll be no more mowing.
That makes sense.
Less mowing is great.
Hardscape it how? Like,
It's, I think there's a couple of trees proposed, small trees, some bushes and mulch.
okay. Sorry, hardscape to me means like stone. So it just was like, in terms of the aesthetics of the environment and, you know.
No, it'll match
well-being.
the rest of the amphitheater.
Okay, great.
I think it's like planting.
Gotcha.
Okay.
I've always heard hardscaping being paving or
Yeah, if it was going to be like a cement slope or something. That would-
Like a patio. Yeah.
Right.
Sorry.
Well, you never know. And then, I guess the only other question I had is, so this is coming out of our capital projects budget, and a few of these seem to be like very particularly related to, for example, like the Spring Creek Basin remediation, that's very much related to the project that occurred there. Was there, when we closed out those projects, was there still contingency left over that we then put into capital projects, or did we kind of I'm trying to remember, because I know it was close-ish when we closed them out.
As we talked, if not in both places here, but definitely in finance, there are some funds left over.
Right.
Right now, what we're talking about is taking these out of the capital projects fund. However, as these projects become more defined and they move forward into action, we will look to use those remaining resources, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, it's been a while since we had that meeting, so.
No, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
It's an unusual situation, but it makes no sense to talk about two different pots of money right now until we know exactly which projects do get moved forward.
Okay.
Can I just join in just
Sure,
to
Dan.
offer one memory I have, and that is that we used some of those funds that you just described, Randy, to help with the curb cuts and some of the access requirements that we had. And there are other needs out there that aren't under that same umbrella. So I hope as we move forward that we'll be able to give attention to this thing, particularly the access to the facilities, to the schools that involve, for individuals who don't have impairments with mobility, being able to switch it, throw a switch on the door rather than having to be let in.
So, as we've stated previously, just to make sure that everyone is reminded, such improvements such as those, we're prioritizing at times when work on those types of components of the facilities is necessary already to kind of like double up there. However, again, once we get through this first round of projects and move these forward, this is the first time we've done projects in a couple of years, quite honestly, especially the scope of projects. We do have that in mind as well. So I appreciate the reminder, and it's fine. This is the appropriate time to have that discussion.
Thank you.
Peter?
Yeah, I think just as a, thank you very much for this. I just want to, highlight really one of the things that the board can attend to, and probably the facilities committee in the future. You know, obviously these are the kinds of things that we'll be looking at. But the really kind of cool, innovative potential in planning for the future, not with what's happening right here, but the way that the district can think ahead, and some of the, those LEED Platinum projects were obviously really exciting. Our community really liked them. They're really just awesome schools, and the ways that we can continue to do that through upgrades and through our planning, and how that can come out of and maybe even lead to revisions in some amount of time on policy 33, that sustainability policy that was passed a couple of years ago. So I just think this is, I don't know, I just really, I guess maybe want to keep geeking out on this, and I'll just stop talking.
Thanks. Gretchen?
Well, I would just add, so you can stop talking, but I'm just going to add to what you said. That, as we make decisions about things that are, for example, listed here, that we are doing it through a sustainability lens, because that's cheaper and it's better, but we don't always talk about it. And so I have noticed in working with the COG that a lot of the sustainability things that the district has engaged in, and Randy's probably noticed this too, is not known or recognized. But so it's good for us to talk about it, the fact that this is happening, so that people are aware. So I know Amber and I have also run into that, like in talking with Pam Adams, and she'll say, oh my gosh, I didn't know this was, happening. So anyway, I think it's good to say it out loud. So thank you, Peter, for doing that and putting that, like the no mow. That's just one example. That's great. And we've talked about having fewer mowing areas in the district. And, you know, I view this as a start, so I think it's great.
And having good stormwater remediation is another example.
Exactly, yeah.
Very.
Yep.
How in the lighting.
Right. I
I'll
like
stop.
lighting. So, anyways, question on the point that Deanne had raised in terms of accessibility, and I guess I just don't want to just let too much time go past without having a conversation about how, or at least have a conversation about when we would have the conversation, or where, or what the appropriate process would be to to talk about that priority.
This might have been in finance, but I remember in the conversation we were talking about going back and reviewing, in a sense, the priorities that resulted from the audit that was completed, the walkthrough that happened with members of the community and the administration that looked at the needs. And this is now some years ago. In fact, I think this happened during the disability work group discussion, if my memory serves. We talked, yeah, I think that was part of it.
And now that Mr. Fisher is up and running after several months, and he has an assistant director, he has also been plugged into that group as well.
Great.
Yep, we
Sounds good.
appreciated Mike attending the other week.
Great. Thank you. So maybe the facilities and grounds might be a good place to schedule a review of what process
Where we
might be.
stand, basically.
Right.
That'd be great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on these? Any public comment? All right, we will have a roll call vote then. Thank you so much. Sorry.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Crevecore?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Ms. Pop?
Yes.
Ms. Zibby?
Yes.
Dr. Anderson?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Brand?
Yes.
Dr. Buck?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item H is a motion to approve a resolution in support of the Pennsylvania School Funding Litigation for Fair Funding. This is shown in attachment 6H.
Duffy, so moved.
Huff seconded.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this item? Jackie?
I'd just like to express my appreciation to the board for considering this resolution. I think it's really important that we work for all students in the state of Pennsylvania to have an equitable and adequate education. And so I really appreciate the consideration. Thank you.
Thanks. And Jackie, thanks for your leadership on this item, and for continuing to keep us up to date on the progress of the lawsuit. I guess in my perspective, this is important in terms of our commitment to equity as a district, that we care about and prioritize equity for all students in the state of Pennsylvania as well.
Absolutely, and I think it also, it just suits, it's not just about districts who aren't receiving their fair share. No one's really receiving their fair share in the state. So if we can get Pennsylvania, they've had the power to change this. The legislature has the power, but they've chosen not to. And so hopefully we can get some movement with a court case. We'll see what happens.
Miriam?
Yeah, also students express some gratitude as well just for this resolution, and I was very happy to read about it. So, yeah.
Okay, Peter?
Yeah, I'm happy to wait.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. Sometimes we do this round robin, so.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'm just looking this direction. Yeah. Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you so much for putting this together. It is awesome. And I had some questions about just very cosmetic sorts of things, so inclusions of the word "and" to follow each of the whereas statements. I
Yeah,
don't-
Peter, I emailed you back about that. I went and did adjust, there was a couple errors in linking each whereas statement together,
Yep.
and I made those corrections, and they've been adjusted in the document that's here tonight.
Then I don't need to say anything, and that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, there was just a couple that were missed, whether there should be an and things like that. So we tidied that up, and that should be all adjusted.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Moving on.
you had asked about some titles.
Senator, pro tempore of the Senate, and
Yeah.
then majority, because Kerry Benninghoff is the majority leader. It is part of his title, and Jake Corman is the president pro tempore of the Senate. Those are their titles. This is not a hill I'm going to die on, but it seemed appropriate for them to be addressed by their titles.
Yeah, it was just, because we have Representatives Benninghoff, Irvin, and Conklin in a list, it was a little awkward to try and add that one in there. So I wasn't sure how to make that work very easily, so. So I didn't play with it because I didn't feel like fighting with it. But I understand your point. It's very legitimate.
Yeah, I think that all that it would say would be to State Senator and President Pro Tempore Jake Corman and House Majority Leader Kerry Benninghoff and Representatives Rich Irvin and Scott Conkle.
Ah, that would work, sure.
Yeah. Could we insert that without objection?
It seems a matter of decorum, right? It's their title.
Exactly.
We use their title.
And it kind of does call, sorry.
It adds credibility to the document. I mean, out of due respect to the individual.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
And points out that they have a little bit more power and influence over the outcome with this.
They do,
So-
absolutely. Yep. Yep. So since there wasn't objection, can those be included?
Yeah, I don't see it.
Thank you.
Sure, and then we'll just, when we have it posted, it'll have those included then.
Very good.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions over here? Laurel?
I wanted to say thank you also for taking the lead on doing this, and I do think it's important because this involves the state legislature meeting the constitutional obligations. So even if we didn't feel that there was any impact on us, even if there were not equity issues, even if there were not all the other good reasons to do this, it is important for us as a school board to be aware of and to help educate the public and insist on the legislature meeting those constitutional requirements. And Pennsylvania is rather, it's not very common for this to be, my understanding, for this to be an actual constitutional issue. It is in Pennsylvania, and it speaks to the long history of public education in this state, in this Commonwealth that we are part of. The only thing I wanted to just mention, because so much of this talks about the disparity between state funding and local funding. Having come from a state that had a lot of state funding, that can also become a problem because if the state then decides to keep things artificially low, it can really affect the ability of people to advocate in their communities for what they want. Our disparity is so great that we can't really even, I mean, we're really far out of line. But I do think it's something worth keeping in mind, that we're not necessarily saying everything should be done at a state level.
Right.
But that when there are as many inequities across the board here as there are, then we do need a bigger lens looking at it.
And Laurel, I think that speaks back to the concerns we've had over property tax elimination strategies that have come up in the assembly, that those are taking pretty much the funding decisions up to the state level entirely, and then you're relying on the state to make good decisions about funding. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're so completely
Exactly.
reliant
Good point.
on them making good decisions, that there's some balance that can be achieved with a mix of local and state funding. Dan?
Yeah, I just want to add to this conversation that not only does this impact that should engage us as a board, but also members of our board are represented, or represent the school district in the larger regional community through the intermediate unit. And the intermediate unit has a number of school districts that have really separate financial circumstances, very different from ours. And they really are, in a sense, the target for this particular legal court case. So, and as the school district's board representative on the intermediate, just like Jackie, we kind of have conversations, and we get to spend time talking about needs throughout the region with school districts that don't happen to have the deep pockets that we do. And the circumstances that we're in are quite different. And I think an effort like this can level the playing field. So I think that's worth mentioning at least.
I think in line with what, Dan, what you're saying in terms of, that we have a responsibility towards the other members of the intermediate unit to bring their needs to light. Our kids in our district, I think that they are affected by inadequate funding for education in our state, because as residents of Pennsylvania, certainly if they continue to be residents of Pennsylvania after, graduating from our system, this has an effect on the Pennsylvania economy as a whole, to the extent that we are underinvesting in the education of a significant portion of our state's youth, so.
It lifts all boats
Right.
in the harbor, basically.
Yep, I think so. All right, any other comments? All right, any public comment on this item? Okay, we will have a roll call vote then.
Dr. Cravaport?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Ms. Cobb?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Anderson?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Dr. Buck?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes. Okay, so that item has passed. Then moving on to information discussion, we did the health and safety update at the beginning of the meeting. And then looking at item B, under information discussion, we're looking at the 2022-2023 academic calendar again. And this is shown in attachment 7B, and I'll turn it over to Dr. O'Donnell and Mr. Johnson to provide an update on that planning process.
Thanks, Amber. I do appreciate your consideration and voice on the fair funding, having been in some different districts and seeing things a little differently, as well as working closely, in particular at 5 a.m. today with all of the neighboring superintendents. It is, in all seriousness, you're right, Dan, and you know, so investing your time and energy in something like that is important. I obviously appreciate your support in my participation with the Keystone Center for Charter Change, because neighboring districts are impacted greatly, especially, you know, during the past year and this year with, in particular, the cyber charter situation and the dollars that it impacts how they can operate for their resident students. So thanks. Transitioning to the calendar, last meeting you made a motion and tabled the action, and through discussion, you know, I walked away with a request that I believe was to start one day later. So all that we did here was developed an iteration for you based on what the discussion, and we put a school day in the April Sunday. So right now what you have are is attached there that has one snow day in the calendar. And just for everybody's clarification, the use of snow days is to try to stabilize the end of the year and that date. We average, you know, we're looking at 3 to 4 in a given year snow days. So, you know, we'll likely need to be in that next week. But, you know, we'll do our best and lock, you know, put in the snow days in the calendar and notify parents. So that's where you are. I'm not going to rehash everything and my view on how we measure and value and all that. So if you have any questions of us, we'll do our best.
Laurel?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions and comments. One was, there had been some other ideas. One in particular was October 7th, and whether that could be moved. I know there was some discussion about how that affects things with, or how changes in general affect the quarters, but I'm wondering if that was considered, and if not, how that worked out.
No, we only have 2 professional days during the year with our elementary staff, so we really don't want to move that. It's a critical check-in with our faculty. So that was our administrative team's recommendation, and so no, we haven't considered moving that. We really don't have much time with those faculty members. I believe that's a non-teacher parent conference date.
Because the 27th and 28th then
It's a
are.
K to 12.
Yeah.
It's the only time that we can get in service where all teachers can be a
During
part
the
of it.
fall, yeah. So.
Okay, and then we had a couple of people who wrote to the board who mentioned the, excuse me, the calendar committee and the work that they've done, which we always appreciate, people working on our, you know, working on things and helping bring them forward. But I just wanted to check, when I had looked, it looked like there were fewer community or parent representatives, and how that, what led to that, and also how often the committee met.
Yeah, so Laurel, the policy asks for the superintendent to make a recommendation, and I don't want that committee to become a politicized group. So what we've done to help with, for example, religious voice there, rather than saying you have to have this pastor or that rabbi or this pastor, we use Sharia to go out to an equity work group on religion. We have so that's one example, and I think that, you know, the committee doesn't make the calendar, that it's a voice so that we have different programs, make sure our contracts are adhered to. There's a lot of moving parts, the state requirements of days and hours. And so where we have concerns or questions, we go out and talk to people. So our ag teacher, who's probably been going to the Grange Fair since before she could walk, she went and met with our high school ag students to talk about the Grange. And it didn't take away how we view the evidence on the value of a day, because if you really look at it, those 27 students who missed for the Grange, if you're going to weigh it on evidence of data, then we should shut down school when we have an away football game. So, you know, we wanted to make sure we're having conversations, and our recommendation was, hey, students can do educational trip forms like many people do throughout our community and still attend 5 of 9 days, so they could attend all the days, but yes, they would have to miss some school, just like many of our students in activities or for religious reasons. But to the point of the committee, Laurel, if we believe we need to put somebody else on it, we will. If we're going to go out and put different community representation on it and make it a real large committee, then I'm not sure the purpose it serves would shift, so that's not what we have done or asked. And CJ and Danielle chair and organize it, and obviously I've been around the block a little with the calendar and try to weigh it in as well, and hence why we shifted our day from this current year to the Friday based on the feedback from the ag program kids. And so I'll end it there. Hopefully that helps you give you the
Well, I
background.
think it does, because it was clear in the emails, at least that I read, that some people really were thinking that this was a committee. At one time, this committee did have a lot of robust conversations, and it was a different type of committee than it is now. But when from the letters that were written, it sounded like there was still the impression that this was, a broad,
Yeah.
large committee, and that's why I was asking for that.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, when you look at
clarification.
the different religious representations, there might have been one. And so if we were going to really look to that, as you know, we're pretty diverse with the many different types of religions. We felt like, let's go, let's have a liaison on the team and then go to get the voice of all the different religions. So that's kind of how we took an approach to that team, so that it didn't become a massive, committee, because we have to come up with a proposal. And so that's kind of how we've framed it out at this point.
Questions? Deb?
I guess as one of the people who had asked you to consider adding that day or giving, starting on the Tuesday instead of the Monday, I just want to say thank you for doing that. I understand it involves more work. My understanding is with the Grange Fair that Monday is considered like Children's Day, and it's free during the day for youth to attend. And that's when the educational shows happen. So even though the number of kids who show at the fair is really small relative to the size of our district, if we do allow to have that Monday off as well, it could allow other kids to attend at a low-cost way to support their classmates and to just learn about agriculture. And that does provide, I think, more support to that community, who is really important.
Well, and that's
in
how
our
we have
area.
had it, and
Right.
that's why we had it.
Exactly.
But then the kids who are most involved with
Preferred
the
the
Grange
Friday.
from our community
Sure.
said, no, Friday's more important than Monday.
Well, and
So
if
that's
you
why we
had to
did
go
that.
either or, then that makes
Yeah.
sense. But if it's
And-
possible to have both, I
Well,
appreciate
you can do both.
having that option.
When you switch to the end of the year, and I'll walk everybody
Yep.
through schools, the value of time when you move past Memorial Day diminishes greatly. So, but that's it.
Right,
I'm
I
done.
hear you. Thank you.
Well, I just want to say that I think it was a good compromise, and it was good that the people came and they spoke, and they said about what's important to them, and I want to thank the calendar committee, because I think they took all that into consideration, because it is a hard job to try to put all these together. And I think this was the best compromise that could have been reached, and I think they did a good job.
Well, 3 days is better than no days that week. I obviously disagree with you and think it should be 4 days. But
Wow.
I agree, it is a compromise, and
Right.
it's 3 days is better than no days. Which we've had some years where we haven't been in school at all that week when the chips fall in this way.
Wow, yeah. And I guess I
agree.
would like to, from the perspective of, still being at a point where I need childcare if I'm not home. If you have young children and you need to be working that week, since it's the first week of class for Penn State, it's a hard week for anyone to take off who works for the university, to be asking for time off that week, and it is impossible to find childcare in this town that week. So, I think I can see that it's a compromise. I think it falls pretty heavily on parents of young children who have been affected in, some pretty rough ways over the course of the past couple years. It's been a hard couple years if you have young kids who need supervision full-time.
In the years where we haven't been, we've gotten lambasted by, we take, so once the younger families
Once they
catch
get
wind of this.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll hear it and I'll forward them, just to educate you of.
But that's why we went this direction.
Yeah, yeah.
Laurel?
With all due respect, this was the first year that we have had this calendar. This is the first year we have started 2 weeks before Labor Day.
You mean this school year, not this coming school year?
Yes, this current school year.
I think, I'm not sure, but I know
I'm
that
talking in
last
terms of
year,
the Penn State date.
Right.
Last-
They're not always the same.
last year, which was with the pandemic start, I'm not sure when Labor Day fell, but we were going to have a conflict with Grange Fair last year, so in the 2020, 2021 year, but Grange Fair was canceled.
Yes, I'm sorry, I meant 2 years ago. It hadn't been picked up on, but as I recall, every year that I was here, the Penn State school started before the school district. That's not anything new.
But
It just
we
isn't.
had- The way that the calendar had worked out in some of those, until the 2020-21 school year, for a number of years, we had, several years at least, we had pegged our start date to the beginning of Penn State and had not had a conflict with Grange Fair, but that was sort of a vagary of where Labor Day fell and when Penn State started.
And I think that's really it. It is one of those things about when Labor Day falls. I don't think that this school board should be bound by a resolution that was made a decade ago, more than a decade ago now. At the same time, we had someone speak to us who used the words, "The State College School District is a moving target. Our calendar is a moving target." And I think that's because the resolution had given many members of the community reason to believe that we were committing to starting the week before Labor Day. After we made that such a strong stance, we were the first in the area to start doing that. Other districts now also start then, before Labor Day. But we were the first to. It was very controversial when it happened, which was back in the 90s. But once we had made that decision, no, it was not in the 90s, it was discussed in the 90s, I apologize.
Okay, because I know it happened
Yeah.
right after I moved here, and that was.
Yeah, no, it was discussed in the 90s,
In the late
and it was so controversial it didn't happen. But once we made the commitment that we were going to do that and keep doing it, that is when Grange Fair moved. And they moved because of our commitment. So I think that that's, we need to think long and, we should be really thinking about what it says when other groups adjust to our calendars or our schedules, and then we move them. Doesn't mean we shouldn't move them. Sometimes there are good reasons to. But we should be very, very careful about explaining them and why and how big a difference it makes. So,
I just want to clarify, I don't think this Grange Fair moved solely because of State College area school district schedule. I do understand that State College was the first to start going before Labor Day, but a large number of other surrounding districts did the same. So it wasn't just our school district that drove the change of the Grange Fair dates. It was a majority of the surrounding school districts that began starting school prior to Labor Day. So I just as
my
a
impression had been, though I may be wrong, that they started to as soon as Grange Fair moved. But I may be wrong about that.
Well, thanks, Laurel. And obviously, when we developed our proposal, I shared what evidence and but I do think, to Carlene's point, this is middle ground from where we started, and what we brought to you, and some of your considerations. So, you know, if you want to do something different, I suggest you make a motion, but if otherwise, we'll plan to bring what you've asked for in this iteration back for an action next meeting. That sounds reasonable.
Scott, just a point of clarification so that we're prepared the next meeting. So, because your proposal is the same as the original proposal, correct?
Right, I'm not saying I'd put what we would bring back for your action is the item on the info section right now, not what we brought last time.
Okay.
Unless, I'm reading the tea leaves, that's the one that stands a chance, and I just want to put a calendar in place for our parents and employees and move on.
I think I'd like to probably request that we have, whether it's in policy committee, I think that's probably the appropriate place to revisit the policy on the calendar. Because I feel like it's like deja vu every year. I'm kind of tired of having these.
We had said that a couple of years ago, but that's where it should go.
I think we need to clarify what our expectations are, because I don't think we should have to have this kind of conflict over the calendar every year.
So what
Well, maybe we would still have conflict, but
Okay.
yeah.
Still
There'll be conflict.
Well, what became really, I'll just add this, what became really clear in the in-depth presentation, the detailed presentation that was offered during the last meeting was how difficult, how many different competing equities exist in terms of getting the job done, in terms of running a school district this size over the course of the year, and how much sacrifice that requires on the part of all of the stakeholders in understanding what the needs are and coming to agreement about something like this. And I thought that among board meetings I've been on, I know it slowed the process down, but I have to say, I really enjoyed that opportunity for a full discussion in which the community participated and had a voice. And then we had a chance to postpone the decision based on the motion I offered to have this discussion this evening. And this is not set up as a hurdle, but just as an opportunity to have to fully appreciate the questions involved. And even when families would reply to us by email about the issue, I could refer to the recording of that meeting so that the people who were raising questions got a chance to understand all the different moving parts involved. And that presentation was great in terms of really helping us totally appreciate how hard it is to do this. So I just feel a need to share that right now at this point. I appreciate everyone's patience with listening to that little missive. Sorry.
I'm still concerned about your statement because, I haven't expressed an opinion
What was it, on which statement?
on what we bring next time, because I've heard a couple comments saying they like having a compromise, but I don't think we've heard from everyone. I certainly haven't stated what I think about, so I have concerns. I don't want you to walk away from a couple smattering of comments today and feel that you should bring the info discussion item versus the other. It's kind of a little complicated without we can't literally have a straw poll vote at the table because that's like voting. However, if we're not coming forward with two options, which is difficult to do as an action item, I don't want you to bring accidentally the wrong one based on your impression of some comments you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you should vet it out as a board, yeah.
I think it's kind of close, actually, as to what's supported, I don't know. So that just gives me some
And we can talk about
pause.
the policy another time.
Yes.
I have some thoughts for you that might help, so.
I was just going to say, for clarification of process, it would seem that it would come forward as an action item at the next meeting, and you either vote yes or no. And then I thought that was a good idea, Amber, for the process, that would go to committee to try to avoid this mess, in the future. But those are two separate things. And because there's been a lot of discussion already, and the calendar is an issue where you can't please everybody, it does seem like, since it's been info discussion and it was postponed to just put it on and we vote. It's just impossible to come to a compromise on the calendar. I think that's the one thing we can all agree on. So those are two separate process issues.
So the question being, which we bring forward? Well, if it gets voted down, then we have another version to vote on, I guess.
I mean, just like any other item, what the administration recommends is what we.
Oh,
we
I
vote-
see what you're saying,
We
yeah.
vote on and then we move on.
That's where I'm confused, because my understanding is that the administration
They haven't changed their recommendation.
hasn't changed their
Correct.
recommendation, that their
So
recommendation
it's time
is
to
still the
vote.
original calendar. And so to me, it seems like that potentially is what.
And I want to be clear that the committee brought forth the first calendar and not this one, okay? This is
Correct,
what
that's
the
what I'm
board,
saying.
okay.
The administration and the committee's recommendation was the first calendar, which is what I think should come for a vote.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the administration's recommendation of the calendar, they
I
feel.
was kind of taking
And you-
last
and you-
meeting's vote that you wanted to see a different one, is how I know that's what, that
There were
wasn't
questions
technically the
about
motion.
could that
Yeah.
happen? I don't know that, yeah, I mean, so I'm just trying to, from agenda planning and leadership, to make sure that everybody's clear about what's coming forward the next time.
Right.
It should be what the administration recommends,
That's what I think.
whatever that is, just like any other item.
Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's entirely appropriate. I would agree that makes real sense as the motion, and then it can be moved, then it can be seconded, then there would be discussion.
Right.
And during discussion, people can make very clear, they can say, well, and like, so let's say that it ends up being that that it's 2 for the administration and 7 against, and if that were to come, be obvious, then it can fail, and there can be, it can either fail, or someone can withdraw the motion and make the motion for, the calendar that would begin the 23rd or whatever, and then if that were to pass, then it would pass. It would be really weird if both would fail.
Right, well, that's my question to Scott, though, because of the new sunshine law. I mean, would that be possible if the administration's recommended version came forward and failed, but this was presented previously in info discussion, could a motion be made then to approve it at that night, or will we have to move it to a later meeting?
I believe in the absence of any decision to the contrary, and certainly at this point in time with the relatively recent amendment, I haven't seen any, that if you have an agenda item for something like this, and you change the start date by one day to the next day, I think you absolutely are within your right to do that. It's the issue of adding a whole new item
Okay.
of the agenda, not the
Great.
modification of what it is.
That's what I wanted to clarify, because I know the community would like this resolved as soon as possible, and I'm sure administrators do as well, and so I just want to make sure we have each step prepared and we
exactly.
can walk through it.
What is the
at
date of the
meeting.
next meeting?
February 5th?
February 7th?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we still have a couple more weeks.
Talk about this again.
And for public input, people can always
That's
write to the All Board address, but then it would be time to vote.
I think, I just want to raise a concern that, it might be, I think it would be a good idea for the community to be aware that we're having this discussion. I think most people with kids in K through 6 or so probably are not aware that we're trying to make this decision. We've had certainly, among the folks who attend Grange Fair, it's been very well publicized, the concern regarding the conflict with Grange Fair, but I think in fairness to those for whom this might pose childcare issues, I don't want them to find out after the calendar has been approved that we were having this whole discussion and they weren't aware of it. I just think there's, just trying to think about whose voice is not in the room, so. Yes, Laurel?
I completely agree, and that was one of the things that was so interesting in looking back into this, is that in the 90s and even earlier in the, what do we call them now, the 2000s, when we had more of a robust local news agencies, there was much more about these things, and more people read the paper, there was more in the paper, and so you see lots of things. So I think that is one of those things that has increased, unfortunately. We then need to do that, so I think you're right about getting this out to people, and trying to make sure that there's more diversity of who finds out about it. So I think that's a very good idea. I also did have one more question about the calendar. When I looked at this, if I'm correct, if we have one of those very, very rare years that there are no snow days, Then we are going to have a 4-day weekend for Memorial Day. Is that, because the day before, Friday before Memorial Day is the snow day.
Right?
And that, I'm just going to me, I'd rather have if that's going to be the case, I'd rather have us listed to end on the 1st with the snow day after that. Then maybe we'll get done a day earlier, than have a 4-day weekend.
I would too. The chances of that are,
It happened 2 years ago.
1 out of 10 years since I've been here, that's happened.
It's the years my kids graduate.
So,
I'm
yeah.
done with that. But I was looking at it that way, that
And some people think I'm getting soft in my age. So,
I think it's
but in all
unlikely.
seriousness, we're probably going to have some.
But if we were to get somehow there and suddenly have a 4-day weekend, it just, to me, I didn't.
Right, no,
I'm
and
asking
actually,
why that is, why that's there,
That's the
why.
final day of the window for Keystone assessments, and that would be a makeup day, so.
So I
mean,
would just like
we
to
don't-
suggest that as you look at it and come forward with your recommendation, please take another
I
look at
think
that.
this goes back to this whole question of whether we want to build in some snow makeup days into the calendar. And the reason the calendar resolution called for that was trying to stabilize the end of the year so that families were planning
Yeah.
to be here, and things like the start of summer swim team and the start
Yeah.
of camps being scheduled, that there was some stability. Like, since we can know on average there tends to be at least, 3 snow days per year, it helps people peg something realistic to the end of the year.
Right, but the Friday versus Thursday, I mean, if it's Thursday versus Friday, they're going to stay here or not. And it had been that those earlier days tended to be, say, in December or in January or February.
Yeah, and I didn't like the December ones.
Just
but then you
in
sometimes end up not
May.
using them.
Where to me, that's just one person's opinion.
I just think I think Amber's comment about, and I always forget the student's name, but he was such a great rep, just like Miriam, but the architecture student who went on to
Yes.
architecture, who said,
James.
yeah, said, you have to be aware of thinking about who's in the room. So I think you have to be very careful about making assumptions that like people will go on vacation. We have 20% poverty in our district. Those people are not going on vacation. So we don't want to make assumptions about what people will or will not do with certain days off. And again, this is all conversation I think that's most relevant to whatever we put to the policy to make corrections to deal with the stuff from the resolution. In regards to what's the right approach for this year, I think I'll say the same thing I said last time. In the end, the decision I will make will be based on what are the most fruitful and productive instruction days for the most kids. And I think that it's probably something that we need to hope that people are listening and try to think about the entire community as much as we can when we make our vote and vote on it at the next meeting. And all the other discussion stuff about how to value things really can be had at policy. Because we pretty clearly have 2 options in front of us, and that we're not gonna, I think at this point in the year, it's late to be fiddling any further about making decisions.
We always want to make it better.
What's that?
I said, we always want to make it better, but the calendar, it comes down to like, there's not.
It's more
you
complicated than a
either
finely
add
made
at the
Swiss
beginning or the
watch.
end, and there's
So-
not really, there's never actually a magic solution. Yeah. It's.
Well, and I think, if you go with the 3-day week, I think from my perspective, because this will be the board next year, then we'd see how that goes and see how the feedback goes, and then probably come with that parameter in the future. I do think if we get into the policy, I just, we have a draft of a guideline or a regulation document, and I just think if the board's going to write all the guidelines in the policy, then I think that would be a real challenge for you. And
I'm not saying I support that.
I think if we were to draft a regulation, and if the expectation is to have a couple days when we do have a conflict with the Grange, then that's what we would continue moving forward, so that we don't have to rehash and I tell you why it should be 4 instead of 3. We went to 4 instead of 5 to try to have a little bit of
Wiggle room.
extra time there because of that Monday of the Grange, but then obviously we went through why we adjusted to the Friday. But so I think you should, check in, is everybody comfortable next week with an action item coming on your agenda? Right now, you have two options. Obviously, there could be further motions. Laurel could say she wants to amend it because of her thought on the snow day. So hopefully we can get this done next meeting.
Did you have a question?
No, I was just going to say, I just think that we should end with what Bob just said.
I think we should end.
I think we should end.
I thought that's what I said before about
So thanks.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
He didn't say when we should have ended.
So we will get to have this on another agenda committee.
Just keeps on giving.
Okay, so moving on to committee reports, we will have, well, first, the only one we have is the Culture, Climate, and Learning Committee. And Dan, if you could give us an update on that meeting.
Yeah, there were two large elements to that particular meeting. One related to the question of learning loss due to the pandemic and addressing learning loss in circumstances where it's arising. And the other major issue had to do with the response to the discipline disproportionality initiative that is in place to essentially respond to the disproportionate representation of Black students receiving special ed in exclusionary disciplinary consequences. Under the learning loss area, we looked at it from three perspectives. One was the elementary level, one middle level, and one high school. At the elementary level, in January, all elementary schools will be working to organize after-school acceleration sessions to support students who need support in reading and/or math. This would occur in small groups with teachers and interventionists. There's also a movement to address professional development needs and supporting students and teachers in early literacy, phonemic awareness, and phonics. And this is to include professional development for special ed teachers and Title I teachers in the area of ECRI, which is Enhanced Core Reading Instruction. The third area within the elementary program that it requires support involves the role of the elementary principals who are working with teachers and families to support students of social, emotional, behavioral, and/or academic needs, and by largely through support through the MTSS process and the use of the building level data teams to assess response to intervention and the need to make any necessary adjustments. At the middle level, the focus is more related to the homework centers and the need to support students after school through after-school tutoring in the homework centers. And that will be occurring through students in one-to-one or small group instruction. At the high school level, the decision on the part of the administration is to give the attention to students who at a higher level are receiving below average grades, and that means grades of a D or E. And what the finding this year has been that we had the same students who are lower performing in terms of having earned D's or E's, but that it's the fact that we have the same students are earning low grades like this in more than one subject. So that presents a greater challenge in terms of addressing their needs. And the intent is to offer a learning option during the zero period before school starts. The focus will be to focus on those students who are earning those D's and E's in order to help students learn the foundational skills and concepts of their core classes, so they can basically have a chance to revisit and in a sense make up or recover from the losses that were evident in their grade, and raise their marking period grades from the initial marking period. They can move it at least one letter grade as a result of their work in the zero period. In terms of the discipline disproportionality update, as you know, the district was found to be significantly disproportionate in the discipline of Black students who receive special ed services. And from 2016, 2017, 2018, However, the risk ratio dropped from 6.8% to 6.9% in 2018 to 3.43% in 2019. And this year, during the 21-22 school year, the school district has experienced 0 suspensions of Black students receiving special ed services. And there's a belief that the additional measures that have been implemented in the May update have contributed to the direction for these results. And these interventions include proactive interventions and restorative approaches to prevent discipline events. And there was also in the meeting discussion about IEP goals and accommodations for student needs, the role of crisis intervention with a focus on de-escalation, the role of the MSSI program and how it aligns with the multi-tier systems of support. There was discussion about restorative practices and training with the faculty, and also the role of, or the need to address the recess policy and the fact that the male students might be more frequently involved in these disciplinary events, and that we should recognize this in terms of planning. Finally, there was one public comment which really raised the question regarding learning loss and students in the virtual academy. The role of parent involvement with discipline was part of that discussion. The need for remote options for in-school suspensions and the importance of teachers being kept in the loop. And those were the elements that came out of public comment. So that's pretty much a belabored summary for the CCO committee meeting.
Thank you. Okay, any questions about the CCL agenda? All right. Looking at upcoming meetings, we have a Finance and Audit Committee meeting on the 12th, Communications on the 19th, Culture, Climate, and Learning later in the month, as well as our first facilities meeting in quite some time. So just to make a note that these meetings are scheduled for the Memorial Field All-Purpose Room, and we do need to elect chairs still for Finance, Communications, and Facilities and Grounds for this year's cycle. Okay, and then also I just want to make a note of the board having scheduled conversations with the community to be held in conjunction with committee meetings. And we have one scheduled for Wednesday, the 12th, from 11 to 11:45 outside on the Memorial Field concourse. That is weather permitting in the event of inclement weather. I think that when it's like below freezing, it's inclement. That we would move that conversation inside to the all-purpose room. I do think we wanted to talk about maybe if there's other times, maybe other locations, I don't know. I know Laurel had mentioned wanting to discuss further when and where we do these to be most effective.
Yes, when we had met, the last communications committee had reviewed some feedback on the effectiveness and what we got out of the meetings in the fall. And one of the things that we talked about specifically was trying to give people more notice. So I like the idea of giving people more notice. I'm concerned about Wednesday being maybe not exactly more notice than we've given previously. And we'd also heard from some people that what they had hoped to see was an opportunity to have more of an interchange with the board as opposed to just sort of a casual, anyone who wants to drop by. So I thought that we could talk about those type of opportunities and what else we might want, what our goals were really with these at the communications committee meeting. And the concern I'd expressed to you was that if we did do things only around committee meetings, that might cut off time to do other things. So that's all.
Do other things. I'm sorry, I don't understand what that means.
For other types of community outreach or engagement.
That shouldn't be the only time we do it.
Right, exactly.
Gretchen?
So this Wednesday one, this is outside?
I mean,
Is that correct?
if it was really nice out that day, it would be.
I was just looking at Okay, so it's outside.
It
When
is,
possible.
it is.
I mean, if it's not outside, where is it?
The all-purpose room at Memorial Field.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I
In
don't
fact, it
know
might
where
even
the
be
all-purpose
Wednesday.
room is, but I'm sure there's.
That's where we meet.
Okay, that's where the committee meetings are. So there's good signage there anyway.
Okay, no,
What
I was
time's
confused
that
because
at?
I thought it said outdoor concourse, and then I looked at the forecast.
Yeah, like that's not likely for this,
You
for the
mean-
January one.
Maybe after the meeting, it'll be 36 instead of 28.
That's better.
There's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing choices.
Yeah, if you've lived in Minnesota or Buffalo, where I've lived,
Yeah, we might all need electric vests provided by the school district. I'm kidding. Okay, so I think communications would be a good place to have the discussion around additional opportunities. I do think the morning time, one that we held was very strongly attended. And then just before the pandemic, we had one over lunch hour at the SLO Library that had quite a good turnout. So, yeah, I don't know if you were there.
we did that the last round. but
Before
not-
the pandemic.
Yeah, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I didn't hear you
Sorry.
say that part. I was like, yeah,
Yep.
yeah, that I remember.
It was right before the pandemic. It was like the
Yes.
one of the last things we got to do in person.
Yes.
With the public, yeah. Okay, so looking forward to future agendas for action next time. I just want to call your attention to, we are looking to put on a potentially an RFP for attendance area analysis, and this will be an agenda item at the Facilities and Grounds Committee meeting at the end of January. So that RFP would be a discussion item. The permission to release the RFP is potentially an action item for February 7th. So pending discussion in Facilities and Grounds, just a week or so prior to that. This would be a process to find a consultant to help us with looking at the balance and loading of our different elementary schools, where the lines are drawn to ensure that we're loading those buildings equitably in terms of not overloading some buildings while underloading others, and doing some analysis of what we can expect, in the coming decade in terms of development around the district with new housing developments coming on, and looking at population. And we've done this. Last time we did this was before the previous elementary projects, when we did the 3 buildings. It was done prior as part of a district-wide facility master planning back in 2009, I believe. So this is something we need to do cyclically, and this will be another opportunity to do that. So this is not a vote to hire anyone, it's just a vote to go to an RFP process for that, for looking for a consultant for that. And that could potentially be, something that would that it could be a major focus of work if we need to move district lines for elementaries, and it looks like, there's some reasons to have some concern in that regard, so. Dan, did you have a question?
No.
Nope, okay.
No,
I'm
but
sure if you're raising
just
things, yeah.
scratching.
Okay. Any questions on that item before we, okay. And so that would be a discussion in the F&G committee meeting. So with that, I would be looking for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Grant, so moved.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded.
Don't get each
Okay,
other's
is
way.
all in favor of adjourning? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, then we are adjourned.